This video is looking at Between a Rock and a Hard Place by Aaron Ralston, and it's looking at it with specific focus on Edexcel IGCSE Specification A, and in particular the 12 marker, which is the language and structure question, and preparation for the 22 marker, which is the comparison with the unseen. So going through the text, making sure that you've annotated not just the techniques or the methods or so, but also, the effect of them, the impact of them, because really the credit's going to be given for recognizing the effect of the language, the impact it's having. So I'm not going to read the text out, going to assume you know what's happening and jump straight in, where we've got first person present tense. That's giving that feeling of intimacy. So if something's intimate, it's close. So there's the closeness and immediacy, that immediate tone coming from the present tense. It's almost like he's reliving this as he's talking, as he's kind of narrating it. You also have quite up here, quite a precise and factual tone, at least at first. And this is largely created from the short, simple start. I come to another drop off. I've put here it's largely monosyllabic because obviously another isn't monosyllabic. Mono, one, syllabic to do with syllables, so words of one syllable. So you've got that simplicity. It's just he's not at all fazed. He's not at all kind of unnerved by a drop off because it's another one. It's demonstrating that he is completely comfortable with this. He's experienced it before. Straightforward language. There's no kind of panic. There's no undertone of kind of distress or anything. It conveys his confidence. He also uses technical climbing language or technical jargon, jargon, so specialist language. And again, that conveys his confidence. He's experienced, he knows what he's talking about. What you could do is you could definitely contrast this very precise, objective language with the much more dramatic, onomatopoeic, emotive language later after the accident. When you're looking slightly further on in this, so line kind of 2, you can see that bit I've said I descended 10 minutes ago. We're joining the narrative kind of mid-expedition, as it were, mid-adventure. And that whole paragraph is kind of developing a sort of technical sense of what he's doing. The only hint you get of any degree of tension there is the description of it as claustrophobic. And even then, it's to evoke that feeling of a short tunnel. Now, he talks about the lip of the drop-off. It continues for 50 feet down the canyon. It's very objective. It's very factual. It's not saying, how dangerous it is. And you might argue that, his tone here and his approach very much kind of echoes his mindset at the time, that he didn't actually have any idea there was going to be such a catastrophic event about to take place. Start of line 8, he's conveying his experience. He says sometimes in narrow passages, so he's using kind of that allusion, so ALLUSION, allusion to his previous experience, reference to his previous experience. And he's using that kind of anecdotal, an anecdote being a personal short story or personal reference, anecdotal reference, just to show his experience and his confidence. It's possible for me to stem my body across the slot, again supported by the use of the present tense. We have a nice kind of colloquial style. So line 11, I can do this fairly easily. Colloquial down here meaning informal, chatty. And he's addressing the reader directly. So that direct address, you can imagine using it to climb the inside of a chimney. You've got that second person. He's directly inviting you to compare it to that comfortable sort of domestic reference. There doesn't seem to be anything threatening about this environment, at least as far as his perception of it is concerned. We then move down and he carries on these helpful comparisons. Okay, the size of a large bus tyre. He's comparing this landscape, which is, I suppose, inherently hostile, which is kind of dangerous and unfamiliar to the reader. He's using kind of familiar words to talk about it. Oh, I've just thought without jumping on too far, I've got the word dangle here, by the way. So that, there's this slight jeopardy, slight peril, slight danger. Dangling is not quite as precise as he's been before. And yet, once he's dangled, he will take a short fall onto rounded rocks. That's got an element of precision and control to it. He doesn't fall, he plans to take a short fall. It's going to be something that he's going to decide to do. Line 20, we have more technical vocabulary. And I wouldn't kind of list all the examples of this. I'd say, Ralston uses an extensive technical vocabulary such as blah, 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 to suggest not only his confidence, but also his familiarity with his surroundings. We have this precision. He is actually doing all of these actions. He is active here. I traverse, I press, I kick. Yeah. He's listing these actions. He's in control, right? We get this kind of next hesitation in the tone where it says it supports me, but that conjunction there kind of adds in that idea of it being a little bit unnerving, especially with the connotations of teeters. If you teeter, you're kind of on the edge of something wobbling. Okay, if you imagine you're standing on a wall and can't keep your balance, you're all over the place, that's teetering. So conjunction, changing the tone, introducing that element of uncertainty, teeters connotations of lack of stability, imbalance. It's slightly more jeopardous. Okay, he still seems to be doing what he wants to do because we've still got this active, after confirming I don't want a chimney down, he's got time to make those decisions. He squats, he decides to slide his belly, he can lower himself. Okay, and again, it's the same imagery point here. We had a large bus tyre chimneying, now we've got roof of a house. He's using familiar, comfortable imagery in a situation where he's in control. By line 29, as I dangle, we've got repetition of the word dangle, and it's still planned, but we're aware maybe slightly more of those less controlled connotations of dangle, of kind of hanging. I feel the stone respond to my adjusting grip. And I would argue there's an element of personification there. It's almost as if this landscape that he has been completely at ease in is now starting to take on a life or an influence of its own. And if something responds, then, there's an argument that they're consciously deciding to act. So an element of personification, and the idea of a quake, evokes earthquake, natural disaster. His body disturbs it with enough torque body's weight applies enough torque to disturb it from its position. Again, this idea that there's something latent. If something is latent, it's kind of in there waiting, and it's always going to manifest, it's always going to come out, but you just don't know when. So this latent danger that the landscape holds, he's kind of woken it up. By the time we get to line 31, instinct is taking over from planning, so we can contrast the instinct with the language of planning earlier. And the round rocks now seem to be far more threatening than they were when he had planned the fall onto them. We start to get more metaphorical language, more imagery coming in a dramatic way, where we have the chalk stone consumes the sky. So this metaphor is kind of showing that things are maybe taking over, that they are starting to envelop him, starting to kind of get out of his control. And other things apart from him start to be active. So fear shoots my hands over my head. Again, we're kicking into that instinct point. And now all these actions that he'd planned kind of come to a halt. I can't move backwards or I'll fall over a small ledge. We have the language of kind of desperation. My only hope is to do this and get my head out of the way. If you look at the kind of number of things he thinks there, those longer um, kind of reflections or those longer kind of, well, what I've got to do this, got to do this. And then that quick fear shoots my hands over my head. Again, monosyllables. We've got this idea of a thought process, which is taking a long time. And yet the time it's taking is absolutely tiny. This is the kind of thought of a nanosecond or so. Um, then he acknowledges that, the next 3 seconds play out at a tenth of their normal speed. And again, that metaphorical play out implies a lack of control. It's not something that he can do, it's almost something he's just got to watch happen. Time dilates, metaphor, so time kind of expands. Similarly, as if I'm dreaming, we know that it's going to become increasingly nightmarish. My reactions decelerate. So he's getting slower when, he feels he needs to be getting quicker, and actually everything is slowing down. In slow motion, then we get this list. And these verbs are very different from the ones that he was using at the start. We've got smashes, yank, ricochet, crush, and snare. I'd pick up on the kind of harsh consonants of ricochet. It really is kind of bouncing round. And I'd look at maybe the connotation of deliberate entrapment over ensnare. If you have a snare, it's a deliberately set trap. He's become wedged by this landscape. He is generally becoming the passive victim of things. And you can also look at the idea that he's kind of listing these body parts as almost, he's this amalgamation of all these different bits that he can't control quickly enough. We have the kind of the rock slides another foot down the wall with my arm in tow, tearing the skin off the lateral side of my forearm. Again, that kind of near personification of the rock, this kind of imbuing an intention to it. Then we have this short, fragmented minor sentence, then silence, contrasting with the length of the previous listing multi-clause sentences. You're never going to kind of start talking about all of the commas. Look at the length of the sentence, look at the clauses. Obviously, looking up here, thinking, have we got any polysyndeton, repetition of an and? There's maybe a little bit of it there, but more it's that listing of actions going on. After the then silence, so that short section, we have the paralysis. And again, that idea that he's been so active before, contrasting, at the start, he was completely in control and he had all of these fluid movements. Now his disbelief paralyzes him. The gap is implausibly small. There's an indication of exactly what's happened. This is not a gap that his arm can fit into, and his arm's in it. So there is a really serious problem for him. And again, this idea of the body becoming independent, it's almost like every single bit of him is kind of kicking in. He talks about his nervous system separately, almost as if it was a thing by itself. We get this idea of his internal monologue at the time, the good God, my hand, the slight kind of it's not, is it blasphemy? The appeal anyway. Good God, my hand, the shock, the kind of emotion of it. We have the metaphorical flaring agony, which I'd probably link to the searing hot pain on line 48. The idea of fire and heat and kind of the idea of, the boulder consuming the sky, something kind of burning him up, eating him up. Throws me into panic again. He's a victim of an action. He's now kind of not out of control, but he's now at the mercy of things. Grimace and growl, the alliteration adding to the onomatopoeia of that growl. All kind of doing that, gritting your teeth, having to kind of really brace yourself about it. Again, my mind commands, that's a separate thing. So we've got nervous system separate, mind separate, use of dialogue, that he's kind of almost hearing these exhortations in his head that he's got to get on with that. If you exhort someone, you are kind of, shouting encouragement at them to do something. We have the verb yank again 3 times in a naive attempt. This is he has no idea at this point what he's let himself in for. This is kind of innocent. And again, another one of these, but I'm stuck. You can talk about that use of that conjunction again to change the tone, to kind of give that contradiction. I want to do this, I want to do this, but I'm stuck. Then, he becomes ruled by his anxiety as my brain tweaking. So these emotions are now taking over his system. The pain shoots from my wrist with all the connotations of violence and destruction and injury. I'm frantic, I cry out, ellipsis. He can't complete these thoughts. Anxiety, desperate brain. Apocryphal means, probably made up, but he's trying to build up this idea of the narrative to be a positively climactic moment where he manages to parallel this story of, my goodness, all of a sudden I had a superhuman strength and I got out of this. But we know ultimately the end is going to be anticlimactic. Come on, move, nothing. Okay. Um, in order to do that, we've got the italics of light now, the urgency. Chemicals are raging, so personification, full flood. We've got now fire and water imagery. These are kind of natural images, natural kind of almost elements and disaster. He's got to use brute force, look at the connotations, and actually contrast it with earlier with all of his measurements and precision. Now it's just coming down to, can he just use kind of animal strength? Shove, heave, push, lift, verbs that are describing kind of physical desperation. He tries, there's some hint on line 55 of the precision before in terms of the measurement and the awareness of size and physics and leverage. But, thrust upward repeatedly on line 56, you get the kind of idea of the assonance there, the giving you the effort, grunting, assonance, effort. Come on, move, talking to himself. And then again, that kind of damning ending of nothing with that sort of very, very blunt sense of, all hope has now gone. He can't do it. Hopefully that all makes sense. Hope it's helped. Good luck.